Football at 4, powered by the Inside the Birds podcast, brought to you by Bet365. Whatever the moment, whatever the sport, it's never ordinary at Bet365. Geoff Mosher from the Inside the Birds podcast is here. You can get the Inside the Birds podcast on all podcasting platforms. Just search Inside the Birds. It's a Mosher Mailbag Monday. Our mailbag questions for Geoff Mosher today, a lot of them center around the NFC East. A lot of Commanders and Dallas stuff today. We took a lot of questions on that throughout the last couple of days to get you ready for a Mosher Monday mailbag here on the Sports Pass. Geoff Mosher from PhillyVoice.com and the Inside the Birds podcast joins us right now for Football at 4. What's up, Mosh?
Right. It's pretty hot out there.
It is hot. You should be at the beach. What are you doing?
I think it's too hot to be at the beach. I want to be in a ice cold bathtub after a football game.
Well, I'll tell you what, we are now inside 1 month to training camp. Yesterday was 1 month officially to the Eagles reporting at training camp. Today, we are inside a month to Eagles training camp. And obviously, the Eagles, they're going to be all around the next couple of weeks here in terms of, you got the Jason Kelsey event down here. We're going to have Connor Barwin on the show. He's got an event coming up as well. So you'll still hear a little Eagles stuff here and there popping in. But let's get some of the Mosher mailbag questions for a Monday mailbag edition. A lot of these are kind of centered around the NFC East. Some other ones in there. We got some good questions for you this week. So let's see what we got for Geoff Mosher here on the Sports Bash Live. Now, you guys have a Inside the Birds podcast series where you guys are starting to break down the NFC opponents. That's why we kind of tried to get questions based on the NFC East.
Yeah, and we do it differently. You know, we bring Greg Cosell in, and we don't just opine on who we think is good or not. We get Greg's breakdowns on newcomers, draft picks, scheme changes, like Brian Schottenheimer now taking over for the Cowboys. That was today's in the Cowboys. And then we, between Adam and I with our intel on how the teams think about these things, we combine that all. It's really comprehensive stuff.
Well, let's make sure everybody out there listening subscribes to the Inside the Birds podcast, Football at 4. Let's go. Tom and Marmora, you're up first today, Tom. What matchup concerns you more, Geoff Mosher, the Cowboys offense versus the Eagles defense or the Commanders offense against the Eagles defense?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think, Dak Prescott's healthy history against the Eagles is you look at it and you say, man, when he's healthy, he's good to go. But I would say in this regard, I think it's the Commanders because Jaden Daniels showed the Eagles something that you don't see around the league very much, which is a guy who can throw and move and just, will a game by himself to win. That is very difficult to do in this league. We've seen Jalen Hurts do that at times earlier in his career with the Eagles. Their first Super Bowl, their first playoff season for Jalen Hurts, I think 2021, right? He had to win some games with his legs there and his arm. But yeah, Jaden Daniels he's scary. So even though they don't have great playmakers either, but neither does Dallas, they have a more formidable team. So I would worry more about their offense.
Yeah, both teams added weapons in the offseason, right, Moshe? You got both teams adding new wide receiver targets, which obviously makes things a little bit more challenging for the Eagles defense, which is an interesting question that came in here from, let's go to this one, from Will in Pleasantville. Will in Pleasantville says, which situation will the Eagles use Quinyon? Well, actually, he says, let's get this question from Will in Pleasantville first. I kind of skipped over the one that had to do with that last one. But Will in Pleasantville, will the Eagles use Quinyon Mitchell and Cooper DeJean any differently in 2025 now that they have more experience in the defense?
That's actually a great question, especially based on some of the things that we've seen in OTAs. For example, we've seen Quinyon Mitchell playing both left corner and right cornerback, whereas last year he was the right cornerback. So maybe there's a chance he's playing the left side. Maybe, and I doubt this, right? But when I see a guy cross-train, it enters my mind. Maybe there will be some opportunities where Quinyon Mitchell plays and trails the number one wide receiver of the other team. That's not something I imagine happening a lot because the Eagles play so much zone. But you can still do that and play zone within those concepts and move the cornerback around in your zone. So that's a potential there. And then I think Cooper DeJean will definitely it's not that it'll be used that differently. He'll just be used more. He's going to play the nickel position. Vic made that very clear, and that's what they're in, anywhere between 75 and 82% of the time. But it also sounds like he might start at either cornerback in base or safety in base. So that remains to be seen.
Calvin in Northfield, you're up next. Can the Eagles dominate the division again? They went 5-1 last season. They beat everybody twice except for Washington. They beat once. And, that's what made the Eagles in the Andy Reid era so tough. They just constantly beat up on the NFC East. But is the NFC East a fait accompli like it was back then? Because those teams in the NFC East during the Andy days were not very good.
Right. No, they can't. And it doesn't mean anything worse about the Eagles. It just means that the NFC East is tougher than you might think. They went 5-1 last year. Obviously, Dak Prescott was hurt. Obviously, the Giants were 2 wins that were fairly simple for them last year. But this Giants defense, I think, is really, really good with the offseason additions they made, the draft of Abdul Carter. They had good pass rushers to begin with, Dexter Lawrence, Brian Burns. I think that as long as they're healthy, they will be better. And if their offense gives them a break, and I do think the offense is still bad, but not horribly dysfunctionally bad as it was. They will. Andrew Thomas being healthy at left tackle is a big deal for them. Him coming back, because they weren't terrible up front on the offensive line when he plays, and they've made some additions to their offensive line. They have Malik Neighbors now. They're expecting Theo Johnson to be a better player in year 2 at tight end. So I'm not sitting here telling you the Giants are going to be contenders, but I do expect them to be better than a 3-win team. So I think if the Eagles go 5-1, that would be really, really tough in this division now.
Good breakdown. Let's go to how about this one? Mosher Mailbag Monday from Kevin and Cape May. What's the one area where Dallas still has a personnel edge over the Eagles that could close the gap, maybe cause a problem, when they play?
Man, I'm not really sure that they do. So that's it. And you don't have to, like if we talked about the Eagles versus the Commanders last year and said, where's the edge? You might give the Eagles every single edge, especially if you weren't convinced by the second game that Jaden Daniels was going to be amazing. Now, maybe you could say Jaden Daniels is on his way to being a better quarterback than Hurts. That's for fans to argue about. I don't know. But I'm just not sure, if you want to make the argument, Dak Prescott's a better thrower of the football between the numbers than Jalen Hurts. He absolutely is. So does that make him a better quarterback? That's, again, for an argument up for debate. They're all in, I always think that there's like the upper tier, maybe the 3 best quarterbacks, and then you get to 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. You can put them in a blender. They're different every year. But even if you wanted to call that a wash, I just don't know where the Cowboys are definitively better outside. All right, I'll be fair. I didn't really think about this. I like the Eagles' edge rushers, but they don't have Micah Parsons. So I think you can argue that the Cowboys may have a better set of bookend.
And the Eagles have done a good job of handling him.
They have. Well, in certain games, yes. Other games, not so much. But
you always say, anytime the other team's strength is their pass rush, you feel the Eagles have something to neutralize that strength to the best of most teams' abilities.
Right. They've used the RPO game and the quarterback threat of a run to neutralize. You can't rush upfield against Jalen Hurts the way you can against Matthew Stafford. So that neutralizes some of your best pass rush. It doesn't make guys like Micah Parsons any worse. It's just an advantage that the Eagles have to be able to keep them off balance.
Absolutely. It's like, when you have A.J. Brown and the other team has a lockdown corner. At least your strength, they feel like they can do their best to neutralize your strength.
Exactly.
All right, let's get a Mosher Mailbag Monday question. Rick and Absekin, should we be more concerned about Washington's offense adding Debo and 2 starting offensive linemen? They drafted one in the first round. They also traded for one. Pretty good one, by the way.
Yeah, I would say yes and yes, because they were sorely lacking outside of McLaurin in another playmaker. Now, if Debo is not the guy from 2 or 3 years ago when he was an All-Pro in 21 and 1,100 plus yards and double-digit touchdowns in 22, if he's that guy, that's a really good addition for them and makes them that much more multidimensional. If he's not, if he's more like the guy last year, then it's not as much of a concern. However, it's still probably better than Noah Brown or Diami Brown, whatever they were getting from their number 2 guy last year. But I agree with Rick in that I think the starting offensive line is a real, especially those tackles that they added, Laramie Tunsil and drafting Josh Connerly, which, Sam Cosmi can come back and play right guard from that ACL tear. He was a very good right guard. Biadasz is a good enough center. Brandon Coleman will probably move to left guard. He started left tackle as a rookie last year, and for a rookie left tackle, didn't do a bad job. Adam and I said this: if the Commanders avoid the shiny toy in the draft and go offensive line this offseason, that they will show that they are no longer the Commanders of the past and that they are for real with their team building approach and philosophy. So to come away with Laramie Tunsil and Josh Connerly and be able to move some guys inside. Now, Mike, one of the biggest things is whenever they had an injury, they were screwed up front because they had not only a bad starting five, but they had no depth. Right now, you've got Wiley and you've got Algoretti, two guys who've started in this league, and I think both won a Super Bowl with the Chiefs, as your top two guys off the bench. So now, not only are they figuring it out with their offensive line as a starting group, but they have depth that they've had.
Well, and one thing you wonder about their offense is, do they have more peels of the onion now in year two? Somebody asked a question about year two of DeJean and Mitchell. Do they now have a better feel to Daniels and can add more to him than they did last year? Last year you're feeling him out, and you have a better understanding of him in week 10 than you did in week 1. But now you have all offseason to say, hey, I know a lot more about him and what more I can do with him.
Yeah, and you would have to think that, just like the Eagles talk about, part of their success will be about evolution and building off of last year's foundation offensively. I'm sure they're going to want to do more, and Cliff Kingsbury is good enough to be able to add to that.
All right, let's get a Mosher Monday mailbag question from Kevin in Washington Township. He wants to know more 2025 wins, Moshe, Cowboys or Commanders?
The thing about the Cowboys, Mike, is that everybody's down on them, but they have more talent than people realize. So they could easily have more wins than the Commanders. But the thing is, if you're going to talk about boom bust potential, I think the Cowboys have far more bust potential, whether it be injuries or aging or their secondary, where they have a lot of both injuries and aging. So I would say that I think from coaching staff to an infusion of talent to young nucleus, that to me the Commanders are in way better shape to win more games than the Cowboys.
I agree with you on the Dallas thing, that they had so many injuries last year, so it's hard to get a read on what they could have been, because they won 13 games the year before?
Yeah. So. And they averaged when Dak is healthy over the last 5 or 6 years, whenever McCarthy was coach, they averaged either 12 or 13 wins per game. You can't do that without talent. They have a lot of talent. They just don't have the right mix of it at times, and the
coach is a wild card for them.
Total wild card, absolutely.
All right, thanks, Kevin in Washington Township. Let's go to Jeff in Margate. Mosher Monday mailbag. Can the Eagles' revamped secondary handle the Commanders' weapons, McLaurin, Debo, with Daniels under center? A lot of people seem like they're worried about that Debo-McLaurin tandem.
Well, look, to me, it's more about how the Eagles play defense versus how the Commanders play offense. And the Eagles, it's not like they shut down the Commanders' offense per se. Well, we know in the second game they gave up a lot of points. They lost. But even in the NFC Championship game, I don't know if people remember it, but the Commanders opened the game with an 18-play drive that ended in a field goal because the Eagles were really good on third down, and they were also really good at turnovers. The Eagles created 3 takeaways in that game that were not the fault of Jaden Daniels. It was 2 fumbles, right, and 1 got bounced off a hand for an interception. They were sloppy with the football, but they know how to break down a zone. They know how, and if you remember, Austin Eckler caught a lot of balls against them, and McLaurin was able to beat them both deep and on the inside. And now, again, they've got Debo. They have a second year. So they know how to patiently move up and down the field, which to me is not this is the fault of, say, Quinyon Mitchell or Cooper DeJean or the pass rush. It's just about the ability to play those kind of zones and still be turnover driven. That's going to be the big challenge, Mike, for this team. Can they create the same number of takeaways? Because remember, C.J. Gardner-Johnson is no longer there. He was a big part of their takeaways, right?
Yep.
Their edge rushers getting to the quarterback, causing disruption. No more Josh Sweat and Milton Williams.
All right, Moshe, let's get one or two more here for you. Let's pop this one into the old machinery here so that everybody can read it who's watching. Mosher, Monday Mailbag, which Washington offensive player is the toughest matchup for the Eagles defense? That's a good question.
Jaden Daniels? Are we leaving him out of the equation?
Well, I mean, it's like, how do you match him up, right? You know, it's like, hey, do you have the personnel to minimize what McLaurin can do for you? Their run game isn't like this explosive run game.
Right. Well, I think in the spirit of the question, we'll put the quarterback aside because that's obvious. And I'll say this. It's sort of a tie between Eckler and maybe Debo / Ertz. The point is that they are not going to be able to move the ball deep against the Eagles defense a whole lot, maybe once in a while, like the McLaurin bomb, but they're going to try to attack a zone deliberately, methodically, and in the voids, which is the flats, especially. That's why Eckler had 8. If you could fact check me, I thought he had 8 catches for 80 yards in the first game. I think he missed the second game. He was out in concussion, and in the NFC Championship game, he caught some passes, but you fall far that behind from turning the ball over. You can't just throw dink and dunk passes to your running back. But that's how when they move the ball effectively against the Eagles, it's because Ertz and Eckler and the short catch guys are doing their job. So I would look, for the spirit of this question, to see how McCaffrey in year 2, who's supposed to be their more dynamic slot receiver, Luke McCaffrey, let's see how he evolves, because I could see him being an issue.
All right, last one. Let's go to a John in Summers Point. Mosher Mailbag Monday question. How do you expect the safety rotation to play out? Is C.J. Gardner-Johnson too big of a loss to replace?
Yeah, that's a great question, John, because one of the things Adam and I have talked about on Inside the Birds is if you look at Reed Blankenship, he's played really well 2 of the last 3 years, and those were the years that C.J. Gardner-Johnson was next to him, giving him that he can be that deep safety. He can make the plays, and allow Reed Blankenship not have to handle as much responsibility like that. We'll see how Reed Blankenship not only plays next to someone who isn't C.J. Gardner-Johnson, but who's very likely to be a rookie in Drew Makuba. So, yes, I think that the loss of C.J. Gardner-Johnson, is it too big to replace? That's hard. That's a hard question. I don't know. We're going to have to go see. But can I certainly see us having a conversation?
You seem to think so.
Yeah, I mean, can we have a conversation by week 7 where, man, they're not creating as many turnovers. They're not as nasty on the defense on the back end because they don't have a guy like CJ. Yeah, I can see that conversation happening.
Right. That's where, the Eagles struggled without him the year before, is they didn't get anything from their safeties in terms of turning the football over. They just could not get anything, and it was a revolving door. So the question is certainly valid. The safety rotation, you're hoping it's not much of a rotation. You hope somebody secures that spot.
Absolutely. And you hope all 3 of them and Sidney Brown plays well so that you have optionality. If you want to throw 3 safeties on the field, you want to give a big nickel look against certain type of offensive sub packages.
All right, Geoff Mosher from the Inside the Birds podcast, InsideTheBirds.com. You can get the Inside the Birds podcast on all podcasting platforms, and make sure you check out Geoff's work over at PhillyVoice.com as the Eagles go into hibernation for the month of June. But we are inside a month from the reporting of training camp. Geoff Mosher will be all over it. Football at 4 here on the Sports Bash. All right, Mosher, thanks, buddy.
Hey, thank you. That was a great set of questions. Talk to you Wednesday.
Yeah, man. We'll do another Mailbag Monday with Moshe here on the Sports Bash. Those NFC East questions, keep them coming in. You can hit us up on all the socials, text board,